Matt, I'm really delighted to speak with you. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll wait a few moments for others to join. This is a great opportunity to have a discussion about one of the most important and the most challenging aspects of making progress in health. So we'll just give it another couple of moments for folks to join, and then we will start our conversation. All right, let's get started. I'm really delighted to speak with Matt Myers to discuss advocacy. Advocacy, even more than perhaps anything else, is the most powerful tool to improve public health. And we'll be discussing how to do it well, looking back at really David and Goliath battle against big tobacco. This is part of a series of conversations with health leaders as we enter a new era of health in the US and global health, with both huge challenges and big opportunities for progress. Matt helped found the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids in 1996, and he served as president until 2023. He's been one of the most influential leaders on tobacco control, helping to enact the largest federal cigarette tax increase in US history and passed literally hundreds of laws at the state and local level, negotiate the master settlement agreement, make workplaces and public places smoke-free, fund tobacco prevention and cessation programs, raise the tobacco sale age to 21, and prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products. I'll also say that Matt Myers is one of my favorite people, working in the health sector and someone who I continue to learn from. So I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Matt, thanks so much for joining. Let's start with a big picture. The fight against big tobacco has taken more than 40 years and it's not over. What keeps you from burning out? And what do you tell people about pacing a campaign that's going to need to outlast any single administration or person working in the field?
Well, first of all, Tom, thanks. We've worked together off and on for a long time, and I have to admit, it's a real joy. All the things you suggested and gave me credit for really were team efforts. And it's maybe the very first answer to your question of how do you avoid burning out? And I have to admit, to me, I break it into a couple categories when I think about it. First of all is you set really ambitious long-term goals, but short-term targets, things that you can accomplish while you're working towards that eventual goal. And those short-term targets serve two purposes. They're building blocks for future change. And second, they're motivators. Winning motivates continued action. So when you talk about how you stay in it, it is you think about things that will give you the kind of energy you need to keep going when the going gets tough, and victories along the way that make a difference, the victories along the way that bring about change, not as dramatic as you want. We wouldn't be in tobacco where we are today if all we did was think about, gee, we're going to eliminate tobacco. When the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids started, 36% of American high school kids smoked. People told me it was stupid to have an organization like ours. Today, 2% of high school kids smoke. And we can think of a world legitimately today where we can engage in policy change that was unimaginable when we started because of those building blocks. Those building blocks are really important, both as for change agents and as motivators. The second thing I would think I've learned is if you're going to be in it for the long term, build the human and structural infrastructure you need to succeed. Policy change is about team building. It's about cultural change. It's about bringing people into the fold. In the early days of tobacco control, we had some brilliant mavericks. They did extraordinary work. But an individual maverick can only take you so far. And even more importantly, an individual maverick doesn't have the structure around him or her needed to boost their energy when they're tired, pick them up when they get knocked down, and celebrate with them when they win, which is what will motivate other people to come into it. Most importantly, teams are needed because any advocacy involves multiple different structures. If you're going to change politics, it's not ideas alone. It's politicians believing the people are with you, and for that you need to build teams and coalitions. It's developing the communication skills. Not everybody is a superb communicator. You don't have to do it all. Build a team around you that's capable of doing it. It's making sure you have the research infrastructure to do what no one individual can do, but which you can build on, so that you have that broad range of skills with you with it. And figure out people who are absolutely superb listeners because they're the best advocates, because you don't need to persuade yourself. You need to persuade the people you're talking to, which means you need to understand what they think. All of those things not only build towards change for me, but what they do is make the process of change one that you can engage aggressively with all of your energy, but with the support that allows you to do it long term. And I think that's, ultimately really important. And there's a third thing I would add to it, which is the work we do never gets boring if you're in fact entranced by figuring out the puzzle of how you go to the next step. All of the things that some people would see as an obstacle, in fact, are wonderful challenges. The work in advocacy requires you go home every night and ask, what do I need to do differently to elevate the urgency of my issue, bring more people into it, persuade people who are on the fence, create a sense of inevitability to change. And that requires thinking of all the tools we have and how do we use them. And it's probably one of the most, for me, exciting, energizing tools to sit and be the problem solver. On a narrow issue, I think I'd answer the question a little bit differently. Not differently, but in addition to it. Because people sometimes say, why do you knock your head against the wall against such a powerful industry? Well, the tobacco industry taught us that you can get away with selling a deadly, harmful product if, as an industry, you learn to influence what people think, how politicians respond, and what the framework, how the issue is framed. The tobacco industry does it better than anybody else. But, in a real sense, Tom, it's a fundamental question facing all democracies. And that is, how do you bring about change in the face of sophisticated communication on the other side? People with the money and the resources and the knowledge to influence the political system, who even have the power to bring about scientific doubt when none exists. And so in many respects, the work we do in advocacy, but in tobacco advocacy, actually is a core question for how democracies succeed, how they tackle hard problems. Great scientists spend years in a lab figuring out the most complicated problems. In fact, in advocacy, we have a whole host of tools that we know work, and we're challenged with facing some of the most complex problems about how do you make democracy succeed? How do you help them tackle the hardest problems we all face?
Thanks, Matt. That's beautiful. I love the idea of working in teams, because there's only so much that brilliant mavericks can get done. I love the idea of thinking of obstacles as challenges that are like puzzles, and we can be creative and try to overcome them. And I'm really struck by the idea of having long-term goals but short-term targets. It's very much in line with the formula see, believe, create. If you want to strengthen belief, you have to make progress to show that more progress is possible. And it's really striking to think of the framing that you used of making change seem inevitable, because a lot of our challenge is that it seems like the lack of change is inevitable. So we have a lot of ground to cover here, and I want to go quickly. So let's have kind of a lightning round. And I'm going to start with the hardest question. Yeah. So in tobacco control, let's stick with that for a minute. One of the big goals has been, can we denicotinize tobacco? and then we could deregulate some of the less harmful forms of nicotine. No country's done it. How would you try to take that approach of short-term targets and long-term goals? And is there any country you see doing that? Quick answer.
It's a great example. And it's the perfect example of what I meant by saying step-by-step policy change can make what seemed totally radical absolutely inevitable. When we first started working on giving the Food and Drug Administration comprehensive authority over tobacco, I can't tell you the number of people told me that that's never going to happen. It's totally lunatic. And by the time we passed the bill in 2009, after 10 years of effort, everybody sort of said to themselves, well, why didn't we do this before? I think denicotize I fit in the same category. It's time in many respects in tobacco control in countries where we've made enormous progress to change the debate from how do we control, how do we just limit the number of people who are being addicted and killed from tobacco, to thinking of a world where we actually don't know anybody who dies from tobacco use and therefore is not addicted to it. And what we have to do is, I think, experiment with a number of things. So in countries where we've got smoking rates down really low because of policy change and cultural change, in those places, we should be experimenting with a number of different strategies to figure out which ones, work and are consistent with traditional societal demands at that time. Understanding we can change those. When we started the campaign for tobacco-free kids, I was told that it was inevitable kids would smoke. Well, it's inevitable kids will do dumb things, but it's not inevitable that they'll smoke. And, when we talk about denicotizing, I keep hearing about black markets and all these other things. The reality is, in the United States, adult smoking rates, daily smoking rates is down to about 7%. Youth smoking rates is down to about 2%. That means that if we cut off the tools the industry uses to make those products attractive, we are in a position to assist those people who are already addicted and to ensure that those people, the people who never become addictive, had no reason to think of nicotine as the next step of what I want to do in my life. So it's a hard challenge. So where can we do it? We've got to do it in countries that have made enormous progress already. The United States is probably a very hard place to do it because of our fierce independence as a first step. Australia is a potential place to think about it. New Zealand, if there's a change in government there, talked about doing something similar once before. And under the right circumstances, it has its smoking rates down really low to do that. Great Britain, has just passed this ban on generational sales, which means every year they're going to increase the age of sale. If they stick to that, in 10 years, they'll be at a place where smoking rates are unbelievably low. And we can really talk about how do we assist people who are still smoking to quit and ban the sale of any product that causes addiction. So it's in those kinds of countries that I'm thinking about it. The other critical issue is for, and I think this is really important, it's got to be in a place where there is a sustained tobacco control movement, because passing the legislation is the first step only. The communication work that needs to be done to educate the public why they've done it, why it's good for the public, why it's the tobacco industry that's looking to manipulate them, not government looking to deprive them, why that really means freedom. The tobacco industry always talks about freedom. Nicotine deprives people of freedom. We have to figure out a communication strategy, and we have to understand that once we pass the law, we have a decades-long effort in implementation to make sure that everybody in the country understands why we did it, why it's good for them, and why it's the industry who's trying to undermine their freedom.
So let's talk about advocacy more generally. What predicts whether someone's an effective advocate? You talked about the ability to listen. It was really interesting because most people would say, well, they have to be very convincing. But you started with listen, so you understand what you're dealing with. But what is it that predicts whether someone will be effective? And if we're trying to help people become more effective as advocates, how do we do that?
Two levels of answer. One is, first of all, everybody in public health has to be an advocate. It's got to be part of your DNA and part of your job. The work we do, when we succeed, no one realizes it's going on. That's a problem. We have to solve it. Two, while some people are natural advocates, everybody can learn to be an advocate. This is a skill where there are tools we have in order to educate somebody on how you can become a good advocate in doing that. And we have to do that, I think, when we do it. So everybody who works in public health should think, I can become a competent advocate. And third, the thing we also talked about briefly is you don't have to be the whole story. If you work as part of a team, if you're a good communicator, do that part of it. If you're a good researcher, do that part of it, but align with people who can fill the holes. Now, personality-wise, when you ask me the question, it's a really good question. I do start out with the most important skill in advocacy is being a good listener. You're not going to convince somebody else if you don't know what they're thinking, if you don't know what they care about, if you can't frame your message in a way that appeals to them. So, being a good communicator is a top line thing, but being a good communicator without being a good listener means that you make great speeches that nobody cares about. And I think that's really important. Second, a good advocate is doggedly persistent and passionate, but at the same time capable of being emotionally in control so that your passion is directed towards what will be more effective, not what will make you feel better. And I think that's, emotional security and stability and being a focused advocate means you're always asking, what I'm doing the most effective thing to persuade the people or the group of people that I need to persuade that this is an important issue that they need to act on. So I think that's
big difference between I'm saying it because I feel better after I say it, and I'm saying it because I'm closer to the goal that we've set.
We all have to learn this isn't about us. If we're going to succeed, we have to step back and say, what am I trying to accomplish? What's the most effective way to accomplish it? And what are the tools I have to accomplish it? And
how do you make the balance between what an individual does and what an organization does? Because sometimes, we tend to focus on advocates, but it's often the group that makes the big difference.
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, it is the question that goes back to my notion of everything important has always been done by a team, and an organization is part of the team. That doesn't minimize the extraordinary impact an individual can have. An individual can change the public debate. It can draw attention to an issue. It can be a spark plug for new ideas. It can drive organizations to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. But if we're talking about impactful long-term change, we have to combine the people with brilliant ideas who are extraordinary advocates with organizations that have the constituencies that build political support, that help change cultural norms, that have credibility with all sorts of different audiences with regard to it. So to me, the question is never an either or. Individuals can move movements and can move organizations and put them in places where they're uncomfortable. But you need to work together if you're going to really bring about long-term change. Because we're not just talking about policy change. We're talking about changes in culture. We're talking about changes in the way people think. We're talking about changes in the way politicians view these issues. And for that, you need the combination of both to do. And that's why I go back to when you ask the question of who's a good advocate. A good advocate is somebody who thinks that things that no one else thinks can get done is able to be accomplished, but is able to work with others to bring other people on board to the team, to build the team necessary to make that happen.
Yeah. One of the big challenges that we see is understanding the landscape. So if you've got a new challenge, what do? It's kind of like a doctor diagnosing a patient. We have a review of systems. We have a systematic way of what we examine, in what order, in what way. as an advocate who's done this for decades, when you've got a new context and a new program that you're trying to get through, what do you do to understand the landscape? Because that's what determines how you're going to act.
I think it is the most important thing. One of the things I get most aggravated about, to be honest with you, with some advocates, who they have great ideas, but no, I don't understand the political system and the political culture in which they're operating. And frankly, I think those people are intellectually lazy, and it's easier to blame when it doesn't happen. The good work gets done by people who sit down and say, here's my idea. Who has the power to do it? How does the political system in which they operate work? What is it that motivates them to take up this issue versus another issue and take the political risk necessary to do it? What is the public communication and cultural framework in which this will take place? So for me, good advocacy always starts with a very detailed landscape analysis. Who has the power to make the change you want? What's the political system in which they work? What are the levers for change within that system? Who are the people who influence that system? What do they listen to for outside sources of information? Who do they find to be credible? What is the process by which the process has to go through? You need to understand all of those things in detail, and not just in tobacco, but in so many issues we work. You need to understand it better than the people who are opposed to you. You need to understand every trick they have in the book to delay your action. Think those things through. And, none of those things show up publicly. But underneath every major victory are the hours of time someone has thought through finding that information, developing the allies necessary for it, building champions, making sure you have the right person walk into the right person to both ask and bring about change. And if you don't understand all those different systems, you're far less likely to be successful. But the good news is, we actually understand how to do those sorts of things. And that's not just tobacco, that's in literally every playbook with it. If you want to pass public policies and figure out how you influence public attitudes that are necessary for those policies to be successful, we understand how you to build coalitions, how you determine what effective communication is, who are the people who are most important in the process, and how to do those sorts of things. So for me, that's one of the most critical things there is. Yeah. Effective advocates roll up their sleeves and spend hours and hours and hours figuring those things out. That's what they think about before they go to bed in the night. That's what they think about when they wake up in the morning.
Matt, we have time just for 2 or 3 more questions. Let's start with back in the US and back on tobacco. Mm-hmm. The recent trends are very problematic. The entire CDC unit on tobacco control was disbanded. This was the national lead, the Office on Smoking and Health, and it's gone. We've seen a pro-tobacco shift, withdrawing plans to ban menthol. We've seen a reversal of some of the progress that has been on regulation of vaping. And we see that industry stocks and political donations are driving a lot of it. Once again, money and power are lined up against not just us, but our kids. How do you deal with this present moment?
It's a great question. And it goes back to perseverance in thinking strategically about how to do it. We've faced adversity before. Let's be perfectly honest with you. During many years in the United States, the tobacco industry had the upper hand with Congress. They had the upper hand with the presidency. Bill Clinton was the first president to actually be willing to take on tobacco. And we made success during many of those periods before. Before we had a strong CDC office, before you actually initiated the very first paid public education program, we struggled, but we made progress. And so one of the things we have to do is go back to some of our roots. Advocates need to work at the state and local level very actively to promote the tools that we know still work. If we raise tobacco taxes, despite what they're doing, I think we can make progress. If we expand the number of areas that are smoke-free, we can make progress. If we can get local public health departments to continue to educate people about the fact that flavored tobacco, e-cigarettes, and the new pouches are really tricks to get young people to smoke and change the culture, I think we can offset some of the harm that's done, not all. Two, I think this is the time to redouble our efforts at the national level as well. One of the good news stories that doesn't get much told is that after this administration eliminated the Office on Smoking Health and cut out all of its funding, in the most recent appropriations cycle, Congress put all that money back in. Now, is it going to be well spent? Probably not, not under this administration. But what it demonstrates is that if we continue to build support within Congress, on both parties on this issue, I think we have a counterforce to some of what we're doing. The third thing I would say, which is the more radical one and difficult one in this political atmosphere, but I think we need to figure out how to be part of the discussion, which is we need the American public to understand their health and their children are being sold out for special favors and political donations by the industry. And it should be something that's part of the political dialogue. I think it's an important part of the political dialogue. It's hard to believe a slightly better era. When George W. Bush was elected president in 1980, he came after one of the best periods we've ever had in tobacco control. And there was a pending federal lawsuit against the tobacco industry. The tobacco companies did to George W. Bush just what they're doing with Trump. They gave him millions of dollars of campaign contributions. And we began running a series of ads after the election, but before the inauguration, that highlighted all the money that they had given and posed the question, what were they buying? And what we did was showed pictures of kids and said, what they're buying is the freedom of the tobacco industry to go after your kids again. And the first thing you should look at is when they proposed to settle the tobacco and the lawsuit against the tobacco industry for no change whatsoever. And it was interesting because when they then proposed to do it, all the media covered it as a special interest issue.
So giving anticipatory guidance as pediatricians is very, very important. Matt, you raised earlier a broad question. We've only got 2 minutes left. So you raised a broad question on democracy. And in some ways, advocacy both can support democracy and can be threatened by democracy. And we're in a very difficult time where truth is often a victim of partisan politics, where the standard information sources are not accepted. If you had basically 60 seconds to tell people this is what we need to do to make sure that we can continue to play a role in determining our own future, what would you say?
Wow, great question. One is communication. We do have credible communicators. We do have, I'm working on vaccine issues. Pediatricians are wonderful. We need to have a strategy to get the truth out. We have to have a strategy to communicate clearly the precise harm that's caused by all of these issues. We need to figure out how we talk to people who are disaffected with it. We can't be talking down to people. We have to be talking within the community to political leaders about how to do these sorts of things. And we have to be unrelenting in doing it. And third, I think we also have to recognize that many of the things that the administration is doing are in fact not popular when you get down to the real grassroots. We've just run through a term on working on vaccine policy, where we were working in a host of the southern Republican states where there were proposals to eliminate vaccine requirements for school kids. What we discovered by polling using Republican pollsters was that, in fact, most moms and dads, most Republicans' moms and dads, don't want that to happen. So we engaged in a campaign to educate Republican legislators that they shouldn't be deceived. What they were being asked to do, in fact, wasn't in their political interest as well as the interest of their constituents. And we succeeded in forestalling virtually every one of those bad bills. Not easy to do, but this is the time to step up and use the tools we have, the communication tools and the credibility tools.
Thank you so much. Long-term goals, short-term targets, teams, learning the landscape, communicating well, starting with listening. These are all hugely important, not just for tobacco control, not just for public health, but for us as a society, so that we can continue to make progress despite the fact that there are companies out there that want to sell us things that'll make us sick. There are folks out there that want to produce things in ways that will contaminate the environment. But ultimately, not only is truth on our side, but given the right information and listened to, most people are on the side of promoting health. So thank you so much for what you've done and continue to do, and look forward to the continued conversation.
Thanks, Tom.